When I was 15, I had my first serious girlfriend, Emma. We lived in a quiet, upscale neighborhood with peaceful streets where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. Emma lived just 2 blocks away from me, which made it easy for us to hang out almost every night. One Thursday evening, during a school break, I decided to walk over to Emma's house. It was later than usual, but with no curfew to worry about, I didn't think much of it. As I walked, I began to hear strange noises coming from around me, mostly behind me. The first sound was the rustling of a bush, but I didn't stop to check it out. I just quickened my pace. A little further down the street, I heard the distinct snap of a twig breaking. This time, I stopped and turned around, scanning the empty street. The bushes lined the sidewalks, separating them from people's yards, but I couldn't see anyone or anything that might be making the noises. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I started walking even faster. I was almost at Emma's house when I heard footsteps, quick, light steps that seemed to be getting closer. I spun around, but again, there was no one there. My heart was racing as I finally reached Emma's driveway. I called her, and she picked up immediately. I told her how freaked out I was, describing the sounds I kept hearing. As I approached her front door, I noticed her looking out from her bedroom window, waving at me. Then she asked, "Who's that guy right behind you?" I turned around and saw a man crouching just 10 feet away. Panic surged through me, and I screamed, running toward the door and pounding on it. The man grabbed me, trying to put me in a headlock, but for some reason, he let go and took off running. Emma's mom opened the door with a look of horror on her face. She quickly pulled me inside and locked the door. Emma came running downstairs, and I collapsed on the floor, struggling to catch my breath. Emma's mom hugged me, asked me what happened, and immediately called the police to report the dangerous man. They let me stay the night, and Emma's mom drove me home the next day. That night still haunts me, knowing how close I came to something far worse. It was a stormy night, one of those nights where the wind howled and the rain pounded against the windows with such force that it felt like the house might blow away. My family was scattered throughout the house. My parents were in the living room watching a comedy show. My sister was upstairs playing video games, and I was in my room watching TV. Storms like this usually made me feel cozy and relaxed, but this time was different. A loud bang on my window made me jump out of my skin. I looked over and saw a figure standing outside in the pouring rain, but the water streaming down the glass made it impossible to see his face clearly. He started pounding on the window, shouting something that was drowned out by the storm. I cracked the window open and he screamed, "Let me in. I'm hurt." The rain was so loud that I had to yell back, telling him to come around to the front door. Then I slammed the window shut and ran to the living room, breathless. I told my dad there was a man outside, injured and screaming for help. Before we could react, we heard the pounding on the front door, accompanied by desperate shouts for help. My dad was about to open the door, but something in me made me stop him. "Wait," I said, feeling uneasy. At that moment, the phone rang, and the TV displayed the caller ID. It was our next-door neighbor. My dad answered, and I watched as his face turned pale. "No way," he muttered into the phone, then hung up. "Stay away from the door," he told us firmly, peeking through the window to check the front stoop. He saw a man crouched down, pounding on the door, holding a large, sharp tool, a chopping axe. My dad yelled through the door, telling the man to leave before the police arrived. The man eventually gave up and disappeared into the night. When my dad spoke with the neighbor, he learned that the man had been seen rummaging through their shed earlier and had taken the axe from there. The police found the man wandering the streets later that night, and the incident made the local news. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if my dad had opened that door. One night, when I was just a little kid, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. The TV was on loud, but even over the noise, I thought I heard my mom calling my name from downstairs. I called back, "What?" But she didn't answer. I figured she couldn't hear me, so I ignored it. Then I heard her call my name again, more clearly this time. I got up and headed for the basement. The lights were off, which was strange, so I stopped halfway down the stairs and called for her again. No response. The basement was dark, and I couldn't see where she might be. A shiver ran down my spine, and I started to climb back up the stairs. Just as I reached the top step, I heard my mom's voice again, coming from the pitch-black basement, calling my name. I froze, fear gripping me. I turned on the light and cautiously walked halfway back down the stairs, peeking into the basement. There was no one there, no sign of my mom or anyone else. Suddenly, a wave of terror washed over me. I bolted up the stairs, crying for my mom. She came rushing down from upstairs, confused and concerned. I told her that something in the basement was calling my name, and it sounded just like her. She tried to reassure me, saying she hadn't called me and that it was probably just my imagination. To make me feel better, she went down to the basement to check. But I didn't feel better. I knew what I had heard, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. Even now, I remember the terror of that night and the thought that something was down there, something that could mimic my mom's voice. My grandfather recently shared a story with me, one that happened years ago, but still haunts him to this day. It was a typical evening on the farm where he lives with his wife, taking their dog, Sparky, for a walk. Sparky was a small Boston Terrier, named after an old friend of his who had passed away. The farm was quiet, and the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dirt path that ran along the woods. As they walked, they passed another person on the trail. Sparky, being the protective little dog he was, barked and pulled at the leash. My grandfather said hello to the stranger, who was wearing a large hood that obscured his face. The stranger didn't respond, just kept walking. But Sparky kept looking back, barking at the man. My grandfather tried to calm the dog and hurried along the path, but something made him turn around. The stranger, who had passed them moments before, was now standing behind a tree, watching them. My grandfather's heart raced, and he picked up the pace, trying to get back to the house. He always carried pepper spray in his coat pocket, just in case, and his hand instinctively went to it. As he got closer to the house, he heard the leaves rustling behind him. Before he could turn, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth and nose, cutting off his air. Sparky barked furiously, biting at the man's legs, and in the struggle, my grandfather managed to pull out the pepper spray. He sprayed it wildly, hitting the man in the face. The man screamed and let go, and my grandfather stumbled forward, trying to run. He made it back to the house, shaken but unharmed. The next day, he reported the incident to the local authorities, but the man was never found. My grandfather still takes Sparky for walks, but now he always carries the pepper spray in his hand, ready to use it at a moment's notice. I grew up in a rough neighborhood in California, where gang violence was an unfortunate reality. My best friend Tony lived 2 doors down, and we spent most of our time together, riding bikes around town or playing video games. We were 12 years old when we made a horrifying discovery that would change us forever. One evening, we decided to check out an abandoned house in the neighborhood, a place that had been empty for years. It was rumored to be haunted, and we were curious. As we approached the house, Tony pointed to one of the windows. "Look," he said. I squinted at the window and saw a face peeking out from behind the curtains. At first, I thought it was just a Halloween decoration. Maybe someone had snuck in to put it there. But as we got closer, I realized it was too realistic, too detailed to be fake. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to sneak in through the back. The door was unlocked, and we crept inside, trying not to make a sound. The house was dark and smelled of mildew and decay. We made our way to the living room, where we had seen the face in the window. Tony picked up the head from the windowsill, but he immediately dropped it, screaming. I looked down and saw a pool of dark liquid forming at the base of the head. It was blood. The head wasn't a decoration. It was real. We heard a creak above us, like someone was moving around upstairs. We didn't wait to find out who it was. We ran out of the house, jumped on our bikes, and pedaled home as fast as we could. The police were called, and the neighborhood soon learned that the head belonged to a victim of gang violence, left there as a gruesome warning. Tony and I never went near that house again. The image of that head, the blood, and the sounds from upstairs still haunt my dreams. Last year, we had an unexpected visitor at our house late one evening. We live in a rural area where unexpected visits are rare, especially after dark. It was around 9 p.m. when a man knocked on our door. My mom answered it, and the man introduced himself, claiming he was opening a new business in the area. He handed her a container of Clorox as a sample and asked if she liked American-made products. He then said he was going back to his van to get a vacuum cleaner to demonstrate. But when my mom looked out and saw 5 other men sitting inside the van, alarm bells went off. She told me to run and get the phone, but I couldn't find it. Instead, I grabbed a knife and stood around the corner, ready to defend my mom if necessary. She threw the Clorox container outside and shouted at the men to get off our property, threatening to call the police. The men didn't argue. They quickly got back in the van and sped off. We never saw that van again, and to this day, we wonder what their real intentions were. My mom's quick thinking and intuition likely saved us from something far more sinister. I've always loved extreme sports, mountain climbing, parasailing, scuba diving, but skiing has always been my favorite. One winter, my friend Jake and I decided to go backcountry skiing, which is skiing on unmarked, unpatrolled areas outside of the ski resort's boundaries. We drove upstate, off-roaded to a remote area full of hills, and set up camp near the bottom of a slope. After setting up our tent and gear, we hiked up the hill to scout the area. We got in some good skiing, but at one point, Jake and I got separated. I'd assumed I'd find him at the bottom of the hill, so I didn't worry too much. As I walked with my skis, I ran into another skier. He was friendly enough, asking about the best spots and if we were camping. He had his skis strapped to this orange backpack, and we chatted for a bit. He mentioned that he and his wife were looking for a good spot to camp near others and asked if I could lead him to our site. I reluctantly agreed, feeling like I had to be helpful. As we hiked back, I pulled out my walkie-talkie to check in with Jake, but the connection was spotty. The static made it impossible to communicate clearly. When we reached the campsite, I turned to the man and smiled, only to realize something was off. His skis and backpack looked eerily familiar. They were Jake's. My heart raced, and I realized this man wasn't who he said he was. Before I could react, he lunged at me, grabbing my leg and stabbing it with a knife. I screamed in pain, but managed to grab my flare gun and fire it at him. The man backed off, clutching his face, and I called 911. The rescue helicopter. I lived in a small college town where everything was within walking distance, including the bars and downtown area. One night, I was out on our front porch, smoking a cigarette while studying for an exam. It was late, around 2:30 in the morning, when I noticed a girl from the apartment next door stumbling home from downtown. She had clearly been drinking, and just as she got inside her apartment, a man appeared out of nowhere and knocked on her door. I watched as she opened it, and he introduced himself, which struck me as odd. Who comes to a stranger's door at that hour? They talked for over 10 minutes, and I could see she was uncomfortable, not knowing how to end the conversation. The man was creepy, stroking her hair and inching closer to her door. I made noise with my textbook, letting him know I was there, and he eventually left as quickly as he had appeared. The girl and I called the police, and a few days later, we worked with a sketch artist. When the sketch was made public, the police received numerous calls. The man was a serial rapist who preyed on women leaving bars, pretending to be a cab driver offering them a ride. We were both lucky that night, but the experience left us shaken, always looking over our shoulders, even in our small, seemingly safe town. I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and that one time was enough to convince me never to use it again. I found an ad for a ping pong table and arranged to pick it up from the seller's house that night. When I arrived, the man opened the door and invited me in, telling me the table was in the basement. The house had a strange, cottony smell, but nothing that set off alarm bells right away. The man led me to the basement where the ping pong table was set up. He suddenly remembered he needed to find the paddles and ran back upstairs, leaving me alone. I waited and waited, but he didn't come back. Growing impatient, I started to look around the basement. There were framed photos on the furniture, but they were all pictures of the man, no family members, just him. It was unsettling. Then I noticed a drawer slightly open in the back room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it open, revealing a stack of old Polaroid pictures. My heart dropped as I realized the photos were of a young woman tied to a chair, her mouth covered with tape. Panic set in, and I knew I had to get out. I tried the basement door, but it was locked. I heard the man's voice on the other side, apologizing and saying he'd find the key. Desperate, I searched for something to unlock the door. I found a small screwdriver and managed to turn the lock just enough to open it. I didn't look back. I ran to my car and drove straight to the police station, showing them the pictures and giving them the man's address. It turned out he was involved in a child pornography ring on the dark web. I was lucky to get out of there unharmed, but the thought of what could have happened still haunts me. When I was 14, I started babysitting for a family in our neighborhood. They had a 6-year-old boy named Cody, who was sweet but a little different. His parents warned me that Cody often talked to himself or his imaginary friend, especially when playing with his toys. One rainy afternoon, I was watching TV while Cody played on the floor with his toys. I noticed he kept talking to someone named Lucy, as if another child was sitting across from him. Suddenly, one of his toys, a small crank-operated racing game, activated on its own, despite being across the room. I asked Cody how that was possible, and he looked at me with a serious expression. "Lucy's playing with it," he said. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Later that night, after Cody had gone to bed, I was in the bathroom washing up when I heard a knock on the door. "Cody?" I called out, but there was no answer. I opened the door, but Cody wasn't there. Then I noticed the door at the end of the hallway slowly creaking open. I turned off the bathroom light and walked towards the room, expecting to find Cody trying to scare me. Instead, I found him sitting on the bed staring at me. "Who opened the door, Cody?" I asked. "Lucy," he replied. I was officially creeped out. I picked Cody up and took him back to the living room, where we stayed until his parents came home. I didn't mention the strange events, but when they called me to babysit again, I never responded. Love creepy stories? Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Our email is in the description. Please send in your horror stories.